good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the season two finale of A Black History of Electronic Dance Music, the lecture series here at Harvard University. This guest lecture series is an adjunct to our course Afro Amber 146X, which explores the rich contributions of Black people to electronic dance music. We investigate how this genre, often associated with Black, queer, femme, and non-binary individuals, has underpinned communities and economies with discussions spanning cities, domestic, and abroad. We are pleased to close season two at Harvard's esteemed Hip Hop Archive and Research Institute at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research. We're welcoming Juliana Huxtable remotely, a writer, artist, and musician who will deliver today's reading. For our audience here and online via YouTube live stream, we'll have a Q&A session after the talk. Online attendees can use YouTube's chat to submit questions, and please keep your questions brief for broader participation. A recording of this talk will be accessible on our YouTube page, so please go to A Black EDM on YouTube to subscribe to our page and watch past videos. Our website hosting these talks is also at bem.aaas.fas.harvard.edu. Please visit to view the lectures from our prior season, and you can also subscribe to our mailing list, where you can receive other important announcements related to the study of electronic dance music here at Harvard. You can also click to see a new website section called The Study, which features stellar student projects produced out of Afro Amber 146X, including Harvard College alumna Chloe Califiano's podcast, Afrofuturism, In Search of a Soundscape, Electronic Dance Music, World Making, and the Black Imagination. This is our final talk of the season, and we were really excited to host Madison Moore in October and Susie Analog in November earlier this semester. At season's end, I'd like to thank the stellar team that makes this series happen. Many thanks go to our production manager, Gabriel Brock, and creative designer, Gustavo Borges, an alum of the course's first semester. I could not have pulled off the season without their creativity, know-how, and verve. I also thank our team at Education Support Services, including team lead Kevin McGowan, and our video and sound crew, Johnny Video, Jeffrey Valdez, and Kicheng. Lastly, we thank the Mahindra Humanities Center for co-sponsoring this season. Now, to introduce today's speaker, students in Afro Amber 146X introduce our esteemed guests before each episode. Today, Naja Gauss and Henry Addison, Harvard College juniors, will introduce Juliana Huxtable. Naja Gauss is a junior in Winthrop House studying economics with a secondary in African American Studies and a citation in Japanese language. Before moving to Amsterdam, the Netherlands, for high school, she called Washington, D.C., Sao Paulo, Brazil, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tokyo, Japan home. On campus, Naja is the music executive for the Harvard Crimson, a DJ on the Harvard College radio station, a comp director for the Black Arts Collective, and a violinist for the Harvard Pops Orchestra. Her classical training and the culture she grew up in all influence and shape her music taste and perspective. Henry Addison Jr. is from Washington, D.C., and currently in Adams House. Henry is pursuing a joint concentration between biomedical engineering and African American studies with aspirations to join the medical field. When not cramming P-sets, Henry regularly works with the Adams Hair Project on braiding workshops and braiding students' clients, goes stargazing with STAR, the astronomy club, and tutors local middle and high schoolers. Please join me in welcoming Naja and Henry to the stage.
Juliana Huxtable is a writer, artist, and musician living and working between New York and Berlin. She's had solo exhibitions at Rena Spalls, New York, Project Native Informant in London, and the Museum of Modern Art, among others. Her work has been exhibited and collected the Guggenheim New Museum, Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Student Museum in Harlem, and the ICA London.
Her forthcoming poetry collection will be published with Wonder Press in 2025. Her first collection of texts, Mucus in My Pineal Gland, was co-published by Wonder Press and Capricious in 2017, and she co-wrote Life, a novel with Hannah Black, which was published in 2018 with Budalang Walther Koenig. Please join us in welcoming Juliana Huxtable.
Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Okay, cool. So I can hear myself. Is there a way for me to not hear? Oh, I think I mute. Um, I mute the sound on your end. 1 second. One second. Audio speaker. Okay, that is much better. You can still hear me, right? Okay. So I'm thinking of this, the sort of working title for this is Notes from the Front Line. Thinking and writing about electronic music for me has to be an embodied experiment because music is embodied to me. What I find so fascinating and urgent and what constantly draws me into music is the way that it can synthesize a sort of sensory experience. And so pleasure, excess, just like the feelings of sounds, like all of the aspirations that people bring to um, intense, immersive sensory experience. And for me, that is a way of actively triggering lines of inquiry into cultural histories, immediate context. It's like a form of ethnomusicology. And so I'm calling this Notes from the Front Line because this is essentially taken from notes that I write after I DJ, notes that I write when I'm in a club, when I hear a fantastic set, or not so fantastic set. And so I have compiled notes. So I always have a notebook with me. I write when I'm in the club, when I'm feeling inspired by something. If a set, if the way that a DJ has crafted a set of references in their specific set, I will write about that experience because I want to capture that sort of experience, that what music can do with this trigger and this merger of pleasure and all of the other things that I love about a heady relationship to the world. So lines of inquiry into like culture, into history, into the way that technology influence and conditions the way that we experience those very things. And so this is Notes from the Front Line. There is a beat and there is the beat. The beat precedes all and is constrained only by the conditions within which it emerges. The candor and formants that articulate its attachment, memes of cultural fantasies that all believe themselves to be so self-evidently universal. The beat is contentious, the result of Occidental machinations whose superstructures fail to uphold the sequencing of the machine logic, leaving belts to rust, jam, and flay open at the thrust of eager and vengeful vegetation, to the chagrin of those disinherited of the many industrial evolutions. The beat is apparently dialectical, folding itself into the European core via the tinkering of the Black West Indies, slipping in via tape delays and dubbed echoes into the explosion of British polyrhythms. The melancholic swing of machine music sonatas for the moon's reflection on eerie lakes, infecting the eager post-war imaginations of post-war Berlin. The beat emerges with and through the voice, articulating, gesticulating, and muting so as to guide, speak the beat as attachment, aspiration, lamentation, and refusal. This is the beat at its most unmistakably Black, or so we are told by the dialectic of musical purification. Kill the vocals, fire the MC, champion the minimal, the universal, the pure expression of musical form. Those disinherited of the industrial evolutions were already disinherited of the humanist soul, now constrained to the role of the magical, soulful Negro gesture, unable to transcend their genial benevolence to the universal expanse of cold to the touch neutrality. As Tanith, an early DJ producer in the 90s Berlin techno movement, that's techno with a K, put it, at the time of Technozoid, there were already the beginnings of a split of the scene. Some wanted more of a house style, while others wanted even more of a techno style. Vola and I were convinced that you could go further with more techno, with a firmer style than with house and soul style. We thought, we are white brothers with no soul, and we don't need all of that. We want to let off steam. As if I, don't have steam to let off. These dichotomies persist as demarcations in the topology of genreification, of ethnomusicological gerrymandering. I am in search of the beat. It is my beloved, and this auto-ethno musicological fiction is my echolocation of the beat and its severed voice, redemption of its truth from the myth of a soul. Scene 1. Alan comes over to my apartment to take part in the ritual. We're going to a club, but it's more than that, and besides any possible point to enumerate further. My head rushes, no poppers. With a jerking halt and our driver's clear exhaustion at our endless banter and indiscreet drug use, we arrive at the arrival point. Alan and I get out, are walking towards the austere edifice with large-scale text art on its exterior. Lines spill to vanishing points, and no one can avoid them. We graze the line for a familiar place to chat and cut, which surprisingly isn't a faux pas to anyone in line. We cut and wait for less time than the other line, but more time than my last. I chirp to the friend of Alan, who I also know and find sweet. We wait, Alan, his friend's friend, and I, in the faster, but not faster than my last time line. The distortions are beginning, the cue running and returning to and from horizon line. Muffled syncopations assist in the expectant disunion of flesh through an ontological restless leg syndrome. We are, as any regular knows, preparing for our deliquescence into streams down sweating walls. The bouncers aren't convincing as entirely incurious, though it seems they try, but surely are as assholes first, then, after we're permitted entrance, embodiments of some German sensibility that feels questionably in pursuit of objectivity, but produces no noteworthy harm. After all, they saw and permitted your entrance. We are on the list, so most of this doesn't apply, but the list doesn't take away the corrosion of the experience, which is more so a fast track to being stripped to bare life. A Gomben at the club doll. I never lose sight of the golem hidden in some corner of the club's top floor offices, occasionally running to the roof to peer over, visible only as a flash of LED blue or stage flood red, indistinguishable from the occasional burst of light from the second floor club within the club. If not the golem, then the imp in the tower of my mind, reminding me to destroy whatever transitive pride the list falsely afforded me attachment to. For all the times I've grown weary and suspect of my corporeality, its libertine flirtations, even in modest attire, my flesh in its unsatiated search for the pleasure denied to it for so long and for too many reasons to go into here, has pulled the whole of me into poorly lit rooms of unequal exchange with extractive men who have substituted fantasy for shame, clinched fear and punishment of others. I have found a space of rejoinder, a temple for the cathexis of pleasure filled with thousands of micro-libertine love stories, set to low-end, booming instrumental scores with the occasional, if faintly audible words of want between lovers. I only expect to dance. The rest are visions of excess. I was given a Sunday afternoon slot, an adventurous choice for an institution conservative only in its bookings. Predictably, I arrived 10 minutes before my set time. Friends from New York, Beirut, Berlin, London, and Paris are all here. No drinks, just cigarettes and the club mate. The DJ before you is thinning the dance floor. Don't be afraid to pick it up quickly. My agent texts me while I'm in the cab. She has become a friend, agent obviously, and at times coach in the corner, treating stretches of my sets as pugilistic performances, encouraging reflexes, sensibilities, and skills through which to polish my command of imagination. It is equal parts brooding ecstatic, seductive, exhaustive, redemption, and always, always industrial. Searching for signs of transfixiation in the faces and bodily surrender of the dancers I capitulate to. The floor fills and I am plugged to applause. The workday is done. It is 16 o'clock. Scurry to the garden, find a concrete burrow behind the bush. Line of John's legendary K, a bump of 2CB, a taff and a half of a heavy ass Hoffman. No mushrooms, so I suck my teeth. Losing the floor, but finding the beats, I'm dancing on fluttering feet. Jaw agape, the sky is dyed. Friends unfit for the long stretch are now sojourning home. I follow the mystic kindled by the line. Find Nancy. It's been quite some time since I last saw her. We move through the main room, follow the mystic down the winding stairs to the grand hall, which is cavernous. Beatless scents roll across an exhaustively scaled lot covered by resting, dreaming bodies in psycho-sensual wanderlust. Nancy and I are one, tickling and flitting each other for a hot bend in time. Coming to, we have an audience, are told we are beautiful. Nancy's friend arrives. Time bends and I'm on a dance floor, completely deliquesced, just swinging wet. There's a very cute boy next to me. I'm confused as to whether his smile is unhinged or sweet. I throw some salty wet his way, a slight splash of disco on his sweating face. He licks the drops away, and now my tongue has fallen out, is now a puddle, is my face. Reflecting across his macula, his vision span, one side of lap dance, we're playing in light information, slow grinding with no hands. I'm soaked and salty in a top that slips, having already suggested it slipping off. His shirt is gone just as fast, leaning in to introduce himself. Raphael, he says. Juju, I say back. Soon enough, I'm in his arms and we're making out. Scene 2, Amphetatopia. I open my notes app to a headline, fissure/rectal bleeding. I have sat down to write after denying the urge I had to see if there was chocolate mousse in the refrigerator. It's not that I think it's probable, but it's possible, and that possibility redeems me in a way that sitting with my thoughts in the moment doesn't, or doesn't have the gilded possibility of. Of course, it always does. Writing, like my thoughts, is always gilded with the sublimity of potentiality. Thoughts I get to experience in real time, but thoughts can produce within them structures for future thoughts, notes and visions and hallucinations of empirical importance. Lately, I think more than I write. I fear my writing, or fear the dissonance between my thinking and writing, will reveal my undisciplined wit as freewheeling, unscrupulous, or otherwise lugubriously cast. The avoidances are less intense now, for I find, in my solitude, which is itself a product of discipline and ritual of a different order, sincere inspiration. When I set aside the muddiness of urbanity, which I need to set myself apart from within, I experience the rush of love, thought, and movement, even if it's a short-lived high. I find so many of my highs are the product of habit, making space within the mundane for the joy of the hard fought. My feet are tingling between pain and ecstasy. I was at the club today from 12 p.m. to 9 or 10 p.m., which is when I usually arrive. I felt uncharacteristically prepared, took a tab of acid after I did my makeup, running out of the door as if I was late to work. Dion has just played a brilliant set, and I was just coming up into Boris took over the dance floor. Crush the skulls of the enemy's children, smash the beer bottles against the concrete walls, condition utopia with lines of amphetamines, stuff the holes, split the lips, spring has sprung on the spree. The muscularity of the Northern European bodies on speed is sending me. Jumpman tweaking. I think what New Yorkers find humorous in the term deadass, Germans have no word for. Their sensibility, or is it a modality of the uber literal? Jumpman is an icon of joy, aspiration, Jordan soaring across the court, the tyranny of physical disadvantage as the defining condition for sports celebrity embodied in an aspirational analog. The rave tweakers remind me that some people go to the club as a form of literal nationalism. The speed has made them godlike. I think of returning home from the club 3 years prior to my ex's apartment. He is spundled, he is the most able-bodied, he is the most virile. I remember waking up to his rousing after beginning to drift off to sleep, my body amenable to him. I am not God, but am his pleasure, am his amphetamine love sport. There is no screen as the sun bleeds through a crumb-covered mattress, and I am filled. My insides make their way around the familiarity of his movement, and I'm not God, but one's pleasure. Back to the dance floor. The jumping Germans, or maybe they're Danish, or maybe they're Dutch, are clearly not gods, and I am my pleasure tonight. Riding back on a motorized scooter, thinking about how I disassociated from the sex they demanded the dance floor acknowledge them and worship to. What the dance floor, quote, is for, end quote, is beyond the scope of what I can scramble through in my thoughts as they are pummeled by the legendary German DJ who is sampling crunchy German man vocals. The Motorhead throat decimator must, oh, busting nuts and wrecking guts to the ethnic purity mix file. The intoxications are aggregate now, and love lessons loses to the dealers who have readied their stockpile. Scro talks the strictured balls so that they swell their muscat dawn, hang at the injected lips, dip, strike, then kill. I'm lost, but not in a K-hole. The symbolic is genitally differentiated, and my watercolor UV glow is crushed by the demand for muscularity to match the interior. Mike, my friend who I'm dancing with, begins a riff about something 70s, architectural, and fascist. I make a note to return to this thought because I feel them muffling again. I can't really hear him or my own curiosities because the German lawyer who I'm being held hostage to the idea of a dance floor date with is pacing the span of my view of everything outside of Mike, Alan, and Joe, all of whom I'm dancing with. I have to leave this bar. The amphetamines or the Germanness or the double amplification of the two is befuddling me. I would have liked to ask Mike about the architecture, and I would have liked to hug Joe and Alan. Scene 3. It was here on the dance floor, after the dissolution of what I thought was a life partnership, that what was otherwise the insurmountable weight of my absolute misery and heartbreak became the animating force of something dramaturgical. The shadow had gripped over me a suffocating web, dissolved into the skin, blending with the psychedelics in my system to open polyrhythmic time and polyrhythmic ontology. My misery was also my redemption. As a belladonna of sadness, the screen was the dance floor, but my performance was blind. I wanted to be freed of the burden of sight, to witness what I invoked in others, to just be in the lucidity of this morning, cutting itself open as unrestricted movement through beat. I was a slave dancing, the black mistress of the caliphate. See thee set free of her hooves, now the negress mystic, wailing with her hips to the resonances of what her kin made with broken technology. I was a slave dancing, the black mistress of the caliphate. See thee, freed of her hooves, now the negress mystic, wailing with her hips to the resonances of what her kin made with broken technology. And I here with these bleeping commiserations or decimations was in the black sublime. I thought of him for a passing moment, of the hope invested in our mutual mourning, the peak modernism of black itineracy, and I let go the connectedness that love had woven me into. I was returning to the space in which, like blackness itself, the very notion of the human was reworked sui generis. And the break that occasioned such a birth, entailing such unspeakable violence, such inhumanity. This was in my dance. This was in the beat, the cascading tears, the tossing of flesh. But more than anything, I and it was nothing, was polyrhythms and flesh and violence. Was the beat chopped at serrated edge and screwed back into my spine through the circularity of a writhing baseline. I shook all of me, flesh swinging, covered in cigarette condensation, as my dead-assness was finally aghast, steaming off of me the allure of a mad woman. Speaking gibberish with hips in the way that jazz is also madness, is the explosion from the place of capture that speaks to something fundamentally Black, living, but fundamentally through means that many have mapped, or at least thought they had, that the structures of techno were an invitation to swing and fall off and against them was so obvious to me. The K amplified this, was an agent of cataclysmic shifts so that one could fall, explode, scream, come tumbling down and catch the beat again. The beat was a circle. Then I cut the circle into pieces, made mirrors of their light-facing planes, shone prisms across the dance floor that others witnessed as a bird in flight. The beat was a circle. Then I cut the circle into pieces, made mirrors of their light facing planes, shone prisms across the dance floor that others witnessed as a bird in flight. Then, oh Lord, I came up, was shaking a stomping screech, felt the salt of exaltation sting my eye, grimacing into flight, folding the wings into a single ball, squatting, and then serving it to another corner of the dance floor where the drugs seem to be in low supply, their gauntness begging for surplus, and I just may have enough for them. So I volley another ball again. Then, under the heat of the spotlight that the lighting engineer is shining directly over me, or so it seems, stretch the ball into glistening sward, slice air and shaking ass like only a Texas girl knows. Beat King is in the building. The sword is now blown again under the heat of the spotlight, now placing me squarely under its brilliant ambit again, into wobbling curves. I am reverberations, am sound, am the boy I open my eyes to who says, wow, you're a really good dancer. I wipe the tears from my eyes. Want to get some water? I'm Juliana. Um, that's all for the reading.
And if you want to share any closing thought other than that.
I think I'll leave it on that. I kind of want to just like leave the impression of music, sound, embodiment, and kind of the thoughts that it sparks. I feel like that's an interesting point to engage dance music history.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Juliana. Thank you for sharing that tour de force. Oh, we might have just lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, say that again.
Okay.
Oh, we can hear you. I think I just have a delay on my little screen here. So we like to end each lecture with a series of questions. We have an audience here. Naja, our classmate, will pass around the mic for anyone who's interested. So just raise your hand if you'd like the mic. But I wonder if we can kind of pick up from that last point that you made about sort of autoethnography in a sense. And just kind of let there be a pause and let there be a sort of reverberation so we can like let things settle. But then also to kind of invite you to think about what is possible with autoethnography, what you've just read for us, what you've just attempted to convey to us. And I guess to put a finer point on it, what is promising in autoethnography when it comes to being undisciplined or resisting disciplining? I wonder if you can kind of muse on that for a bit.
I think that, which is why I focus a lot on the experience of genre as someone who is highly research oriented, is interested in the literal documented history of dance music. I find that for reasons endemic to the prejudices of academia itself, but also because of just the limitations of how music travels, genre has really failed, and the history of genre and the mapping of music has really failed to encapsulate the dynamism, particularly of the Black contributions to music. So when I am hearing something, for example, traveling between New York, or the states in general, traveling between the states in general, and understanding the way that music has come into its full iterations in house, techno, so many specific scenes. I mean, a lot of the I saw in the syllabus for the courses covered this, but the way in which Black swing, the way that like jazz music then influenced soul music, and soul music then went out and influenced like American pop music and influenced Brit. It's like it's this constant evolution of sound. But the way that music has been historicized really does not capture that. So I I would say in the past 3 years, I spent a lot of time trying to understand what is the relationship between specifically Detroit, to a certain degree, New York, but more so Detroit and Berlin, and these sounds? And where does the line between what, for example, a Detroit sound is, or a Berlin sound is, or even an American sound versus a European sound? And it's so funny to me because it's really these minor kind of like aesthetic differences. Like, so for example, I really, really love rhythmic noise, and I love German rhythmic noise, German industrial, German cold wave, EBM, these like what are perceived to be very harsh, super German sounds. And the way that they are written about, historicized, even in an immediate social context, is as if they are the farthest thing away from in being influenced by Black sound. And that's why I quoted from a documentary early this quote from that DJ that was part of the techno movement, techno TEKKNO movement in Berlin, where they consciously imagine themselves as anti-soul. And they essentially create what I see to be an analog of the magical Negro, where it's like, obviously, Black people living in the Midwest in the complete decimation of the American industrial promises, all of the literal kind of like policy and economic promises that were made to Black people just crumbling. You have Detroit, you have Gary, Indiana, other suburbs of Chicago, completely decimated. And the metaphor of like plants growing through these kind of like old conveyor belt or industrial machines. It's like the idea that those people are somehow jovial, happy, soulful, magical Negroes. And then now these like German producers have single-handedly pioneered the idea of something cold or letting off steam, was just patently so absurd to me. And in the rhythm structures of industrial itself, you hear so much funk, like so much industrial music, so much rhythmic noise. I'm like, this is a funk bass line expressed through a synthesizer and set to really, really crunchy vocals. And I love it. And I understand that this is like German, but this isn't somehow an antithesis. It's not the counterpoint to the warmth of Black expression. And so for me, the idea of a sort of like auto ethnomusicology is an attempt to understand and pinpoint through my own kind of musical history the experience of that music itself. And DJing for me is also playing with that context. So even in music without words, to be able to articulate these kind of resonances in ways that I think maybe arguably moves closer to something like closer to a universal or something than the alleged universality of like minimal techno, which people champion over the more regional. It's almost the way that people will position. It's almost like a dialectical form, not dialectical. Like a more local version of a musical language, and it's seen as like less evolved the second you have a Black voice on it. So I think about the difference between jungle and drum and bass. I think about the difference between what's considered to be funky or soulful techno and German techno. And so much of this becomes about the presence of voices, and especially Black voices, and erasing them to create a space in which other people, particularly Europeans, feel comfortable placing themselves in that context. Yeah.
Yeah. That is so well said. And I think it kind of really sums up a lot of the discussions we've had that last year, this year in class. We read DeForest Brown Jr.'s Assembling Black Counterculture, and in the chapters on sort of the Detroit-Berlin nexus, there's a lot of discussion of post-1989 Germany and this new sound and the sort of hope that Germans had in the sound for reconstructing a sort of shameless nationalism, or a nationalism unsullied by the memory of the Holocaust, for example. And you kind of point to us from the perspective of practitioners how dangerous that move was, particularly the opposition between house and techno. And we have a lot of people in the audience just kind of laughing at every moment that you mention this sort of farce of nationalism, using the genre to sort of erase the past at the expense of what we know is essentially Black session musicians contributing note by note the samples for many synthesizers. I had an incredible discussion with someone who was an organizer of the Moog Festival, for example, who shared this with me, that funk musicians were sort of the basis for a lot of those early synth sounds. And so only 40, 50 years later are we able to kind of sort of reconstruct that history and bring it back to the forefront of our consciousness. So thank you for kind of hewing that together. I wonder if we have any questions in the audience. Please raise your hand so we can kind of get a mic to you. But otherwise, I wonder if you could kind of talk a little bit more about that split in the moment between house and techno with a K. You know, what do you think was the hope behind that split, other than this sort of nationalism that you're kind of pointing to? Do you think anything else was at play in this sort of genre war? And I guess another way to phrase the question was, who was framing it this way? When we look in the history, we see a tremendous amount of black creativity, Black artists and DJs, not necessarily thinking about even genre in the innovation that they made. So for example, Frankie Knuckles being unaware that his mixes of disco and funk were being called house music, for example, only later on learning that. Or same with the sort of genre history behind techno and the sort of export of hot mixes on radio to places like Berlin after 1989. I wonder if you could kind of muse a little bit about who is kind of creating this kind of war between the genres.
I think in general, genre, I feel so many ways about genre. I generally hate the idea of genre because it always fails the inherent diversity and multiplicity and insane complexity of how music travels, is synthesized, enters into the conversation and crashes into other cultures and contexts. And so I think music is just far too rhizomatic and multifaceted to be constrained under under genre. So I feel like I need to say that initially. But the debates in there's something particularly German about a fixation with taxonomy and categorization. Maybe you could argue that's expanded out into Europeans in general. I mean, there are obvious arguments for that, thinking about like the birth of scientific racism and all of these things, but the performance of knowledge acquisition and knowledge mapping, and the idea of like the idea that there's like having a topological relationship to culture is so bizarre to me, because I'm like, there's nothing objective about this. And the need to historicize, understand, distribute, demarcate things through genre is an attempt to wrest a sense of objectivity from something that can't be contained in that. Within Germany, you know, I think of it as actually parallel to which is why I mentioned the kind of influence of West Indian sounds, both like in terms of the technology itself. I think of like dub technology, tape delays, so many things that were coming out of especially Jamaica specifically. And the way that then came over into the UK through early reggae, ska, that merging with that merging with mod culture, and then producing what we come to know as punk music. And the way that even something like a band like The Slit, thinking about early post-punk, it's literally punk, which is already a like hybrid syncretic genre, heavily indebted to the influence of like West Indian immigrants into the UK, then absorbing the newer sounds that are coming out of Jamaica, and then you get post-punk. And to me, I'm like, post-punk is so obviously directly indebted to West Indians. This is not like some like solely white goth genre. But I think in so many ways, also politically, I think that what happened with punk music and all of it kind of like branching out was really a harbinger of what was to come in so many other ways. And what happened in techno with techno in Germany is such a direct analog in terms of what was happening just a little bit earlier, like 1 or 2 decades earlier in the UK. I think that in Germany, the desire for a form of cultural production that could be unique to Germany but did not carry the historical scarlet letter of German idealism, National Socialism, everything associated with that. And even within East Germany, there was obviously the Stasi didn't age so well. Like a lot of the policies of the Stasi didn't age so well. Their relationship to culture in general, to German punk culture, did not age very well. So even within that context, you have people that are trying to redeem a sense of socialism as something that can be ideal, which is a form of nationalism, even though it's different from the earlier German nationalism that had very obviously and justifiably has a scarlet letter on it. But so I think that there's something actually kind of understandable in the desire to find a form of cultural production, particularly among young people, that they can hold on to that doesn't feel edgy. I think that is a really basic and clear motivation for that. But there's a pride that comes about with the techno music and this weird territorialism. So I've watched so many documentaries and I've read a lot of just like kind of transcripts of interviews from early magazines, from later books and things that have been published on it. And it's almost a kind of like adolescent war that's happening, even amongst the Germans. Like, oh, who really started it? And the Trésor people who are very vocal about like the influence of Detroit, branching off from the techno movement, which was harder and more authentically or truer German or something. And the other one was like playful and soul and jovial, and we're the more authentic version of something. And so that's where I think it was coming from. It was coming from a lot of men also. And even if you look at the beef around the first Love Parade, there's a lot of territoriality. There's a lot of just like who was the original, which is endemic to nightlife, music, partying in general. You get that. Who was the original icon? Which was the single iconic club? Like, I think because it's something that is so loose and slippery and harder to contextualize, at least at face value, than maybe the history of a certain strain of literature, because it's just in ephemera. It's something that you can pick up and point to, and you can, to a certain degree, like seal it off. The spaces in which music is performed, the spaces in which electronic music especially connects to people and produces different forms of sociality, generally happens under the radar. And so I think it's particularly difficult to attempt to map that. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
It does. It's so lucid and cogent, and I'm so thankful for your fulsome answers here. It's making me think a little bit about the tension between sort of great man history as a sort of, if we were to gender these, and I hate to impose a binary, but sort of history and its sort of patriarchal mode of speech. I think very much kind of comes through in your answer. Particularly, we've had deep discussions about the label system. Trésor certainly features, and you are right to note that it is a lot of men who are sort of fighting a sort of territoriality, a sort of ownership fight over the genre's origins. And it brings me back to sort of autoethnography, and so many of your scenes were so richly evocative and first person and sensual and textural. And again, I don't know if that's a femme sort of presentation, but it's certainly a sort of humane one. It's certainly one that's embedded in community. And one of my favorite lines from your first scene was Agamben at the club doll. I just love that. Because not only kind of does it bring back to like one of your first answers about sort of the segregation, the ethnomusicological segregation, you called it, that I think you could see evident in some of the earliest sort of jazz theorists, sort of white jazz theorists like Adorno, who thought, jazz was a primitive form, had no sort of music theory or sort of structure to it. And then all the way to Agamben speaking about a state of emergency, perhaps not speaking about music per se. There's a sort of assumption that Black people can't handle theory or are not aware of theory. And so there's something in that line that's so delicious to me and kind of very poetic, but also very real. And I wonder if you can kind of talk about that. What's been your experience, and I really mean that word, underlining experience. What's been your experience with theory in nightclub spaces? Like, does it come up in conversation in the green room or on the floor or after the show? Does it only kind of crop up in the writing that you do or in the writing of your compatriots? I wonder if you could open a window there for us.
I mean, theory and history are obviously very important to me. I think that, like, I resent the idea, if this is your tea, go off, but I resent the idea of, I don't come here to think, like, when people don't bring politics, don't bring all that mumbo jumbo into the club. Like, people that go to the club as a form of escapism, I don't relate to that. I think that's insane. I think that suggests that music, nightlife, clubbing has to be an anti-intellectual, escapist, purely sensuous experience, and I don't think that's true. And I'm really happy to be. I mean, there's always been so many people that have been attracted to electronic music, that have been attracted to nightlife. There's so many entry ways and entry points into it. But I do think that it's shifting now, and that the social stigma that was previously attached to it, where you're just like, essentially, you're just like a spiraling person. This is something you do until you're in your 20s. The only way to do this is to navigate, to be the most extreme caricaturist movie version of some like strung out drug addict or something. And so for me, both as just like a person who moves through the world, but in particular through this writing I've been doing for the past year, it's really important to show how many entryways into, what could be perceived as a sensory experience. And I think about the erotic, and I think about theories of the erotic as like a charged space, as being not the direct framework or context to understand electronic music, and in particular clubbing or raving, but as an analog way to understand the complications of sensory experience and what that can then trigger, because to me, it's inseparable. Sometimes when I hear a beat, I hear and experience the historical weight of that. There's like an supramaterial residue attached to the experience of listening and of dancing. And there are people who will say that that's a stretch. They're just like, I just hear a beat. And I'm like, well, maybe you can turn it off and turn it on, but there's a lot going on here. And I want to do everything that I can to elucidate a version of the complexity that is breathing the ecosystem that is activated through these different modalities.
Yeah, that's so good. And just one more chance for people in the audience, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question as we round to the end. But before I lead us into the audience, one more. You can go ahead and give the audience member the mic. But I wonder, lately you've been doing incredible back-to-back sets with a lot of your compatriots, and I wonder if you can let us into a little bit of how generative that's been for you, that form of collaboration, what you've learned through it. In Scene 2, you shout out Dion, who is sort of professionally known as Tiger Paw. And I can say, everyone has just been so thankful for those back-to-back sets lately that you've been doing. Can you talk to us about that form of DJing, sort of DJing as relationality with not just ideas or senses or the materiality of the club space, but with the real people, with other people who may be pushing you to DJ in a different way or pushing you to think in a different way, or melding with you in a certain unexpected way?
I think in general, one of the reasons why I love DJing and I'm so drawn to DJing as a particularly urgent and contemporary form of cultural production, sphere of cultural production, is that, like blogging or Tumblr or something before for me was so interesting because it really collapsed the distinction between cultural producer and cultural consumer. And that line was really blurred. And the idea of the reblog as something that could itself be a form of cultural production is similar to the DJ, and that you're taking it's a form of collage, pastiche, and there's like an infectious, I don't know if logic is the right word, but there's a methodology, logic kind of structure that emerges from DJing that's kind of infectious, where you want to blend everything, and hybridization is really an essential element of that. And so in the same way that DJing is itself already a collage pastiche genre, to then elevate that to the level of a B2B is really fun, obviously, but I think it's also can really, at its best, can be a really explosive way to DJ. It can also, I think, undermine the culture of the single celebrity. Like I also, that's one thing that I also resent, which is why most of my writing, although I do write from the perspective of being a DJ, most of my writing is from the perspective of being on the dance floor, because I think that that is the exemplar, that is the exemplar experience of music. Like that is the central experience of the club, of the rave, of electronic music for me. Is the people experiencing it, is the dance floor, is the people that are listening to that and dissolving themselves into the sound itself. And so in that way, so I think that playing with other DJs and that culture is like interesting to me, and that it expands the qualities of DJing, of electronic music, that I find most generative and interesting.
We have a question in the audience for you.
Hi, Juliana. I'm Akazi. I just wanted to call back to one of your terms that you mentioned in the first scene that you read to us, vengeful vegetation. And I'm thinking about vengeful vegetation as you've contextualized it as growing through the cracks of the concrete, through the conveyor belts, through the broken industrial promise of the Midwest and America. And I'm thinking of how your experience as a DJ, a scholar, and a club goer are analogous to that. Like, how do you feel, or do you even feel like a piece of successful, quote unquote, vengeful vegetation that is alive and feeding on the nutrients of what was once promised on the dance floor and turning it into, like, photosynthesizing it into something else? And how maybe a continuation of that would be, or an evolution of that would be, you playing along with your compatriots, kind of like teaching the children, so to speak, when you're DJing.
I definitely feel a sense, I definitely feel like I wouldn't say vengeful, but something like vengeful. It's like if it's like what could start off as vengeful and transmutes into rightful or something vegetation. I feel this way in terms of moving through the world. I feel so lucky that I am the direct descendants of people that had zero movement, that had zero a bit. Like, I think that also informs why I'm doing all the things at all the time. Like sometimes my friends are like, girl, you need to sit down, like pick a lane. And it's like, I can't pick a lane. And I feel like it's my inheritance to not pick a lane, and just to explode rhizomatically through the things that feel urgent to me. And I feel very lucky and honored that I get to work at a time where there is more acknowledgement of the influence of Black people on electronic music. And specifically being in Berlin and being in Europe, spending so much time traveling in that way, I I feel and I try to act as an embodiment of that kind of like inheritance. And so in that way, I do feel like a form of that vegetation in a small way. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
It does. Thank you.
And if we have any other questions, one more from the audience.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being here. Your sets, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way, you're probably like my favorite DJ ever, have so much crazy experimentation that people at the club would probably sometimes take issue with. I know there was a big wave of, I remember like LSDXOXO was tweeting about this, where he was like, why are these like Berlin German purists critiquing like hip hop lyrics on the dance floor? Anyway, but I think I just want to ask you in general about your practice of selection, and as you said, the kind of blurring between music consumption and music production. Where do you kind of see yourself situated within the, not just the playing of music and the dancing to music, but also the historical references that you include in your sets? And I know you don't believe in genre, but where does the kind of like transgressive sampling from different places and different historical times fit into your political idea, I guess, of what your DJ identity is?
So yes, that's and that's why in the piece that I read, I referenced that the beat emerging with the voice. So in particular, one thing that I'm interested in and try to fold into my sets whenever I can is the history of the kind of meta narrative a cappella. There's so many early acapellas. I mean, acapellas take on so many forms, but I love this sort of like philosophical / theological vocal track. And so sometimes it's like riding a moonbeam. Sometimes it's something like Green Velvet, where it goes from these more casual, almost like a playful PSA against doing nitrous oxide, into a meditation on the beat. Or house music has like a really grand tradition of these a cappella tracks. But I think those tracks really do justice to the emergence of the beat with the voice, and that so much, I think all electronic music, at least that we're referring to in this specific iteration, that has birthed what we understand to be like modern dance music, all emerged with the voice. Even in the UK, it's like you have raga, and the MCs, like jungle MCs and stuff. And then at a certain point, you end up at drum and bass, which either has no vocals, at least no vocals in the original form, or it's replaced those vocals with like a super muffled white woman EDME type sample. And so I think about that a lot. And it's funny because when I first got to Berlin, I was really fascinated musically. I mean, I love Berlin. I love so much about the culture of Berlin. But I was really shocked at the arbitrariness with which people were erecting the boundary, like, well, this is techno, this is not techno. People would just say, like, people would say to me, I'm like, well, this is not techno. And I was really confusing to me because I'm like, well, I'm literally playing, like, there are times, because I'm ahead, I like playing to my concerts, I'm like, half of what I'm playing is literal German techno producers. I don't understand how this doesn't count as techno beat. Like the people that you're pointing to as the techno people I'm playing in my set, but something about either the other things I'm mixing in, something about me, something about the context in which you're reading me, the tools that you have to apprehend this is really limiting your ability to engage earnestly with me, and you are almost defensive. Just me being here is making you defensive. And so I really, through the process of DJing, became an experimentation where it's like, well, what do I toy with to then get to a point where more people are like, this is techno? I'm more interested in sensibility than I am in genre. And so I will say that what is generally and widely, regardless of where you're coming from, understood to be house and what's widely understood to be techno, my sensibility aligns with techno more because it tends to be faster, harder, more intense. And so I'm interested in that as a space because I like unhinged, psychotic music, over the top, really high energy, really next level. And so I'm attracted to techno because of sensibility and because of the expanse of techno, as in there's so much of the world is under the musical ambit of techno. And so I'm interested in understanding music and my relationship to musical technology as a DJ as a way of accessing that to be that kind of vegetation breaking through. And so, yeah, the removal of vocals is so funny because I used to play more vocals and now I tinker with it where it's like sometimes I'll do things in certain contexts where I'll play like, I do like techno that has like edgy German man vocals in it too. So sometimes I'll play that and I'm like, well, you all don't have any issues with that. Like a screaming German man, they're lit. They love techno, 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 techno. But if I play a voice that audibly gives Black woman, Black man, gives what people associate with hip hop, even though it's not hip hop, it's dance music. Like I'm like, Jersey Club is literally techno. It's just a slightly, it's still like basically four to the floor. It's so insane to me that people are like, this is hip hop. And I'm like, well, what is the difference between hip hop and techno for you? And so I toyed with like the vocals, the presence of vocals a lot. I've toyed with even just the way, like, for example, if a DJ is understood to be German or an embodiment of German techno, that DJ can derivate from what's perceived to be strictly four on the floor. So let's say we're in a context where minimal techno is generally what's being promoted, what people are coming for. If you are already understood to be within that tradition based on your national identity and the context in which you came up as a DJ, you are afforded room to do so much more. Like that, I've seen DJs play sets where I'm like, based on the standards that I am held to, this shouldn't count as techno, but it does. And so now I understand a lot more. I've gotten just being in Berlin and I was like, I want to crack the code. How do I do what I do, but in a way where you all understand this, which will not only be a more just like fun experience to like live here and support myself because I need to be in Berlin and I somehow need to get through to you motherfuckers. But then at the same time, this will help me understand the affective power of music, of genre, of history, how those things are really working, which then expands how I experience the dance floor itself. And so a lot of my writing and my experience as someone who's on a dance floor is richer through understanding the ways in which very subtle manipulation of sounds are like switching something to a slightly more electro version of techno versus us moving from techno into the hardcore. There's these little subtle shifts, and the way that you apply them can completely change how someone perceives the set, how they enter the set, how culturally specific or universal or ethnic or whatever they perceive it to be.
That is very good meditation on method. It also makes me think about a moment when Bobby Beethoven was doing a set and was playing Bobby Shmurda, but took out the vocals because I think he looked out on the audience and was like, I don't think I can share all these vocals with this particular audience. So I feel like there are moments in which DJs can read the audience in that sense too, of, you know, who will get this, who won't get this, who has access to this reference, who may not have access to this reference, who will appreciate this reference, who may exploit this reference. So I think this calculus is always happening. So I thank you for kind of giving us a sort of insight into that. And then we have one more question in the audience online, and I'm going to try to rephrase it because essentially the question is about the idea of habit that you bring up. And we've spent so much time thinking about the sort of idiom of undisciplined or unruly club going, but I wonder if you could meditate a little bit on the discipline of club going. One might phrase it as a habit, but one might also phrase it as a discipline. You know, what's involved in the sort of churning of what is on one's calendar, what is something that someone looks forward to. So that's one question. And also, I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about the ecstatic idiom of the experience of the club floor, but you know, I've had quite radical conversations on dance floors. I've community building conversations, conversations about how we'll survive this political predicament, for example, all intimately shouted at my sort of club-going compatriot, and in a sense, there's a sort of plotting that occurs. I wonder if you can kind of talk a little bit to that, the club as a space of not just community building in the sort of cliched sense, but one of true survival, where it may be sometimes the only public space or the only communal space that people can get to in any sort of regularity, be it a habit or a discipline, but a space nonetheless where one can kind of plot one's survival into the future. I wonder if you can kind of lead us out on that note.
Yeah, the club is a very important, clubs and raves are very important third spaces for me and for so many people. And one of the things I love about Berlin is the fluidity with which time and space exist. And so time just feels endless, space, not endless, but more expansive, more endless than it does in other places. And I think that part of the reason why I left New York initially is because I started traveling outside of New York when I grew exhausted of the relentless toil, at least at the time, and the overexposure and the social media and the new museum thing. And I was like, I'm overwhelmed by this. I'm completely overwhelmed. I feel suffocated by the demand of visibility and the demand of constant newness, new novelty, new, it's particularly in the form of like identity discourse. And then the things that sustain me going out, sure, sometimes like I throw my party, you can go till 11 a.m., but oftentimes it's in this short amount of time and you have to try and get everything out of this really limited window. And I'm like, this, for what I take to be my full third space, is not working. And when I got to Berlin, I was like, wow, you can go out as much as you want. But at the same time, someone like me, it's like, I can't just be escapist. I go through, as much as I love doing drugs and partying and that aspect of it, this is also my job. And sometimes I have a lot of work to do, or I'm just writing and thinking, and I need a different form of mental state. And so I really had to learn to expand my relationship to DJing, my relationship to going out. So I DJ, not at my own party, but 90% of the time, I just drink seltzer water when I'm DJing, and I just let the high of the music itself drive me. And I have so much fun. And so the habit of just showing up just as myself with the space. And I would also do this in Berlin with clubs a lot. This was, I really merged myself to Berghain as like a single person, obviously this is a setting aside of the current boycott and everything that's going on there now, but a club that I really have had so much fun playing at and dancing at before. I would literally just show up on Sunday, 1 p.m., have a little espresso shot. I'm lit. And so it's through these, and I would go almost like the gym. I was like, I need to dance. This is like a habit of mental health. This is where I go see people that I love. We just chat. I'm sitting in the corner. There's an orgy next to me. I'm hanging out with my friend. We're just like chatting about our emotional stuff. It's like, I really, really, really love it. And it's such a dynamic, idiosyncratic, and libidinally permissive space. And as someone that wants interesting experiences, wants experiences where people can be their weirdest, can be their most unhinged to the degree that it's not causing harm, obviously. I love the club as a space for that. And I think that is one thing that the influence of Berlin on other cities in general has been good. The insistence that people can live fulfilling, meaningful lives going out from 1 to 11 a.m. And like that's their period when they go out. And that can be a beautiful, wonderful, like enabling, capacious form of life. And I love that. And I hope to be a part of that. And it's through building habits of health as alternatives to just habits of the more like, oh, I'm doing my ketamine and my acid. That's great. But sometimes I just need to go for spiritual reasons, for physical reasons, for whatever. And so it's through really doing that I've gotten to where I'm at, and I absolutely love what I do. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we feel that. And thank you so much. I mean, you've shared so much across many idioms in your career so far. You have, been a DJ, you've been a music producer, you've been an author of books, forthcoming poet, already an active poet. So we do see you in the sort of multiple idioms in which you express yourself and sort of perform a form of not just autoethnography, but just providing a model for doing this work and thinking about this. And so if anyone has any further questions, just feel free to include, but we will wrap it here. We will give you a resounding applause here in our audience here in the studio, and wish you very, very well in your future endeavors. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So that's it for season 2 of A Black History of Electronic Dance Music. We are so honored to have Juliana Huxtable close us out this season. And please go to our website, bem.AAS@FAS@harvard.edu, to stay tuned for future updates on future seasons. And for now, we have hours and hours of content now on our YouTube page. So if you've missed any of our talks from season 1 or season 2, please log on to at A Black EDM on YouTube to catch up on our past programming. Have a good evening. And thank you, Juliana. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.